Welcome to Lesson 2 of Module 1 and 2 for Investigating Science. The first thing I wanted us to do is our do now, following on from Lesson 1. So create an explanation of qualitative and quantitative observations for each of the following people: a 5-year-old, a parent or a guardian, or your friend not doing investigating science. So pause the video to do that now. This activity should have been really helpful in you understanding the definition itself and therefore being able to explain it to others. And you may have found yourself actually needing to include an example for it to make sense for someone else. And that's what we're going to be looking at today, some really good examples. When we're looking at examples of qualitative and quantitative observations, we are going to analyze these today and look at the benefits and drawbacks of these different types of observations in different scenarios. To do that, we're going to analyze information from secondary sources. And again, we're going to be looking at a different literacy scaffold and then finally updating our inquiry question log. So this lesson requires us to analyze different sources. And when we look at the verb analyze, it means to identify components and the relationships between them. So for each of the different sources we're going to be looking at today, we're going to use this table. We're going to write down 3 points of information, so data from each of those different images, and they're going to show the relationship between the quantitative and the qualitative data in this source. So the first is cells. So we need to look at this microscope picture on the left-hand side of a cell and compare this to a hand-drawn cell that we see here on the right. So using the analyze table, look at this cells information, and I want you to analyze the difference between these two different pictures. The second example is rock strata. So looking at these two different sources and looking at the different observations you can make using each of those and how they relate to each other. The third example is objects falling due to gravity. So we can look at these 3 graphs here on the right hand side and look at the information that we can extract from there. And also to add to your repertoire, pause the video now to watch the NASA video inside a vacuum chamber. And then the final is our analyzing pH information. So to do that, you're going to fill in this table from your practical activity in lesson 1. And then I want you to draw out the relationship between the data you see, that's both qualitative and quantitative, from this pH information. Another bit that we need to look at in terms of observations is knowing what data we should collect when. And this is really important because when we look at the benefits and the drawbacks of each of the different data types, we'll see which ones are useful in different situations. So when we look at benefits, it refers to occasions when the data is useful for answering the question being investigated. And when we refer to drawback, it refers to difficulty collecting and interpreting the information. So if we look at each of these experiments on the right, for each of these different experiments, we can collect both qualitative and quantitative information. When we're completing experiments in the classroom, we'll notice that we can do both. It's just looking at what is most beneficial to what we're trying to get out of the investigation. Okay, are we trying to compare information? Are we trying to see what happens and therefore a description would be helpful? So it is important that we look at the experiment that we're undertaking, what results we want to collect, and therefore the observations we're going to want to need to make. So we can see here these 3 different experiments. So I want you to note down in this table in your document what are the qualitative things we could observe from each of these different experiments, and then the quantitative experiments on the right. And then I want us to think about different experiments that we might have conducted in the science classroom and what qualitative and quantitative data we have collected then. So pause the video now to complete this activity. The final thing for lesson 2 is to update our inquiry question log. And that question is a reminder: what are the benefits and drawbacks of qualitative and quantitative observations? So just a quick summary. qualitative observations, when we're talking about a description, okay, benefits is we can get much more detailed information. However, some drawbacks is when we're describing things, people can make inferences, and therefore people would describe things differently. And when we talk about quantitative observations, when we're looking at numerical data, the benefit is that it's impartial. It doesn't require anyone to interpret information. It's merely a recording of the numbers produced by the instrument that is being used. However, the drawbacks in this is that to make quantitative observations, we do obviously need some really high-end technology, and therefore we start to question the accuracy of those, how expensive they would be, and time-consuming to complete those. So, depending on your investigation, there will be benefits and drawbacks to both of these observations.